Journalist Julian Assange heads to Australia following his release on bail by the British justice after more than a decade of legal persecution. On Tuesday, the first 400 Kenyan police officers arrived in Port-au-Prince to lead a multinational force against criminal groups. The operation raises concerns among Haitians and human rights organizations. In Kenya, anti-tax demonstrations continue amid strong police repression. Thousands stormed the parliament building as lawmakers were voting on the controversial bill. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On Tuesday, journalist Julian Assange heads to Australia following his release on bail by the British justice after more than a decade of legal persecution for denouncing war crimes committed by the United States. The WikiLeaks founder agreed to plead guilty to a charge of espionage, which will validate the 5 years he served in British jails fighting in court to avoid extradition to the U.S. Although U.S. prosecutors are recommending that Assange be sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison, he would not be forced to serve that time in Washington jails since he pleaded guilty. Assange was charged under the Espionage Act for obtaining and disclosing classified information that shed light on numerous war crimes and human rights abuses committed by U.S. troops during the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Julian Assange had been charged with 18 crimes of espionage and computer intrusion in the United States after the uncensorable WikiLeaks website exposed U.S. war crimes from July to November 2010. Assange published on WikiLeaks confidential documents on Afghanistan's and Iraq's operations. He revealed 70,000 top-secret files on the international coalition in Afghanistan, 400,000 reports and 250,000 diplomatic cables on the U.S. invasion of Iraq. All these documents reveal multiple war crimes committed by the United States and its allies in their invasions against Middle Eastern countries. Consequently, he was arrested on April 11, 2019, after being in asylum for several years in diplomatic headquarters of Ecuador in London, until he was expelled from the embassy by the government of Lenin Moreno, being apprehended by the British security forces. Later on May 23, 2019, the U.S. justice system, which had already charged him with computer hacking, indicted him on 17 other charges under the anti-espionage laws. And following the release of the Australian journalist and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks account on social media X issued a statement. In this sense, it confirmed that Julian Assange is free after spending 1,901 days in prison, assuring that this is the result of a global campaign that included grassroots organizers, press freedom advocates, lawmakers, and leaders from across the political spectrum. In this way, the statement also added that there is an agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice that has not yet been formally concluded. The post also noted that Assange paid to expose groundbreaking stories about government corruption and human rights abuses, holding the powerful accountable for their actions. Finally, WikiLeaks thanks all those who have supported the cause of its freedom. In this regard, Julian Assange's lawyer and wife, Stella, wrote on her account on social media X, "Julian is free. Words cannot express our immense gratitude to you, yes, you, who have mobilized for years and years to make this come true. Thank you. Thank you." For his part, President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, said, "On behalf of the people of Venezuela, we embrace and congratulate Julian Assange on his release. It is a triumph of freedom and struggle of humanity for the respect of human rights. Assange is an example of courage and bravery in the battle for truth. Justice will always prevail." Likewise, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel said, "Assange is free. The long and cruel punishment imposed on him for his denunciations of imperial crimes will remain in the memory of the people as proof of how little his jailers believe in freedom of the press." In this context, Julian Assange's brother Gabriel Shipton celebrated his release and affirmed that the journalist's health has deteriorated during his imprisonment.
Well, his health has been deteriorating. He has a few different conditions health-wise. But I think now is a chance for him to rest and recuperate. And we've been told by the doctors who assessed him that he can recover from this. So I think that's the time for him now, is to rest and to recover. But we're just so, as Julian's family, we're overjoyed, we're overwhelmed that he is finally free. This has been an incredibly long campaign with many millions of people around the world advocating for Julian.
On the other hand, Shipton affirmed that international pressure was key to achieve the freedom of Julian Assange.
It's taken years. It's taken constant lobbying around the world, constant protests. It's taken the media. The media has been integral in this. They've been covering this story more and more, which has put a lot more pressure on those who have been pursuing Julian. I've been working in Washington, working in Congress over there, advocating for Julian's release, for the past 3 or 4 years. This has been a global effort to get Julian Assange free, and credit to everybody out there. The Pope has advocated for Julian. The President Lula of Brazil, the Australian Prime Minister. This has been a global effort to free Julian.
In Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese welcomed the agreement reached between the US government and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
I've been very clear as both the Labor leader in opposition, but also as Prime Minister, that regardless of the views that people have about Mr Assange's activities, the case has dragged on for too long. There is nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia.
Let's take now a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. All the stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Tuesday, the first 400 Kenyan police officers have arrived in Port-au-Prince to lead a multinational force against criminal groups. These officers are the first of 1,000 policemen that Kenya will send to the Caribbean nation. The operation raises concerns among Haitians and human rights organizations who accuse the Kenyan police for past excessive use of force and carrying out extrajudicial executions. In the context, a document elaborated by the Organization of American States and signed in Washington by representatives of Kenya and Haiti cast doubt on the legal framework of the mission. Earlier, Kenyan President William Ruto called on the police officers to demonstrate their competence, integrity, and professionalism amidst allegations of past human rights abuses by the officials.
Your performance in this assignment must be a firm statement of Kenya's capability and contribution to global peace and security, and a clear response to doubters and naysayers about your competence, integrity, and professionalism, as well as our nation's credentials.
Monday, the White House released a statement announcing that Kenya will become a major U.S. ally outside NATO. The statement said President Joe Biden made the decision using the authority granted to him by the Constitution and U.S. law. The move comes as more African countries are redefining their relationship with the West. The Pentagon is seeking new countries in Africa to host military contingents and expand cooperation after the forced withdrawal of its troops from Niger and Chad. The agency reported that some African nations have expressed frustration with the U.S. for enforcing issues such as democracy and human rights, which many see as hypocritical, given Washington's close ties to autocratic leaders in other regions. On Tuesday, part of Kenya's parliament building was set on fire amid protests against a new finance bill. Demonstrators stormed the site, forcing legislators to flee in what emerges as one of the most direct assaults on the government in decades. The incident comes as protesters had demanded that legislators vote against the controversial bill imposing new taxes. Shortly after legislators voted to pass the bill, they outmaneuvered police to enter parliament. Human rights groups said police officers fired live ammunition and threw tear gas canisters at demonstrators. The Kenya Law Society president Faith Odhiambo reported that 50 Kenyans had been abducted by people believed to be police officers. Preliminary reports say that at least 8 people were killed and more than 50 wounded by police gunfire. Meanwhile, protests continue in Nairobi against a proposed government finance bill that will raise taxes on citizens. Across Kenya, thousands have been demonstrated against tax proposals tabled by President William Ruto's administration in its annual budget legislation. Protesters believe Ruto's bill burdens salaried Kenyans, entrepreneurs, and consumers. They argue that it goes against the president's campaign promise to place the poor at the center of economic policy, reduce taxes, and lower the cost of living. Police have used tear gas, batons, and water cannons to disperse people. In Palestine, Israeli strikes killed at least 16 people across the Gaza Strip during the attacks that included the bombing of 2 United Nations shelters. In this context, the Wafa news agency reported that 5 Palestinian citizens, including 3 children, were slaughtered when an Israeli occupation aircraft bombed a house in Al-Maghazi refugee camp overnight on Monday. Several injured were transferred to a hospital in the city of Deir al-Balah. Meanwhile, at the crack of this Tuesday, 11 other people were killed in attacks on 2 UNRWA refugee schools in the Gaza City. After 263 days of genocidal war, 37,622 people have been murdered by Israel, most of them children and women, while over 86,000 have been wounded. Palestinian women, men, and children gathered in southern Gaza seeking to obtain food amid the genocide they have been facing for 8 months. Hundreds of people gathered in front of a charity warehouse in the city of Han Yunis to fill their stew pots so they could eat. Palestinians are facing widespread hunger as Israel has largely cut off the flow of food, medicine, and other supplies. In this regard, UN agencies say that over 1 million people in Gaza could experience the highest level of famine by the middle of this coming July. And amid the escalating crisis and uncertainty over ceasefire negotiations in Gaza, the United Nations Security Council will resume discussions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The session will address the humanitarian situation after Israel launched a ground offensive in Rafah a month ago, causing the forced displacement of over 1 million Palestinians in a few days. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated recently that further military escalation will only bring suffering and devastation to the territory. So far, and after 2 drafts presented to stop the hostilities, the Zionist government of Israel maintains its offensive against the Gaza Strip after more than 9 months of conflict. In Israel, on Monday, hundreds of demonstrators protested near the residence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The mobilizations demanded the end of the far-right government, as well as a ceasefire agreement with the Palestinian resistance that would achieve the release of Israeli hostages from the Gaza Strip. In this sense, relatives of the hostages and other demonstrators reiterated their call for Tel Aviv to take responsibility for the death of dozens of hostages in Gaza. Israel's Supreme Court ruled unanimously on Tuesday that the army must begin conscripting ultra-Orthodox men for military service, a move that could bring about the end of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government. In this regard, the court ruled that in the absence of a law distinguishing between Jewish seminary students and other conscripts, Israel's compulsory military service system applies to the ultra-Orthodox as to any other citizen. This measure puts an end to the benefit historically held by males from that religious group. The ultra-Orthodox parties, key partners in Netanyahu's coalition government, opposed any change to the current system, so the ruling could generate a collapse within the far-right government. We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly, share the link to reach more people, constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back. In Argentina, the Union Front of the National Universities began a 72-hour protest on Tuesday to demand an improvement in salaries and to denounce the austerity policy of the government of Javier Milei. In this context, educators reject the lack of response from the executive and a loss of more than 40% of purchasing power. Precisely, a statement pointed out that no public university is possible without decent salaries and with 60% of teachers living below the poverty line. It also added that the conflict at the National University is still open due to the government's decision to increase only 10% of the budget, which corresponds to operating expenses, and freeze the remaining 90%, which includes the workers' salaries. Also in Argentina, hundreds of people protested following the disappearance of a 5-year-old boy who was last seen in a rural village in the province of Corrientes. The child, Loan Danilo Peña, went missing 12 days ago from the town 9 de Julio. Authorities announced that they would ask the Paraguayan police for help due to suspicions that the minor could have been kidnapped by a human trafficking ring. So far, 6 people have been detained as the investigation continues. The case that has caused uproar in the population comes amid Javier Milei's actions to dismantle public policies for the prevention of human trafficking. In Brazil, the government will send 7 planes to fight the fires that took place in the region of the Pantanal. The country's high command also declared the emergency state for the cities of the state of Mato Grosso do Sul that were affected by the fires, result of the climate change and the low rainfall that left 576,000 hectares burned. The decree issued by Governor Eduardo Riedel declaring the emergency situation also pays special attention to the impacts of the fire on agriculture in the Pantanal, which represents both economic and environmental losses for Brazil in close relation to vegetation, ground, wildlife, tangible properties, and safety of human lives. Through a statement, authorities of Brazil warned about the possibility of new floods in the southern territories. According to the authorities, the alert was decreed taking into account that the waters of the Guaíba River have risen in the last 24 hours. One of the main cities on alert is the city of Porto Alegre, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which has not yet recovered from the rains that affected the region in April and May and left 117 people dead and 37 missing. Group D of the 2024 Copa America kicked off on Monday with an underwhelming performance by one of the historic teams of international football. In this way, Brazil could not get more than 1 point in their opening match after a 0 draw with Costa Rica, which has in its recent history the achievement of having defeated great teams on big competitions, as it happened in the World Cup of Brazil 2014, where it reached the quarterfinals and exited the tournament undefeated. For its part, Brazil, despite getting off to an unexpected start, is still the favorite in its group, together with Colombia, which won its opening game against Paraguay with a score of 2-0. On Tuesday, the second phase of the group stage games in the Copa America begins, where current champion Argentina will face its regional rival Chile in the city of New York. It's worth mentioning that Chile is looking for their first victory that will allow them to continue dreaming about the next round, while the Argentinian squad looks to maintain their good streak and qualify with a win to the quarterfinals, getting Chile out of the way. Now talking about the UEFA Euro 2024 Championship being played in Germany, because on Tuesday, teams of France, England and Netherlands that share 4 points in their groups will play their third match of the qualifying phase, and a victory will put them in the next stage. For their part, France will face Poland, forced to win in order to aspire to be a third-place finisher. For France, Kylian Mbappe returns to the starting lineup after suffering a broken nose in the opening match. The European Championship already has 5 countries that will play in the round of 16, some of their 3 games played and others before the end of the group phase. This way, in the next round, there are games already set between Switzerland and Italy, while the Germans, Spanish and Portuguese are waiting for their rival that will come out of the upcoming matches. It should be noted that the next round will start on Saturday, and so far the disappointment of the event has been Croatia, who went out winless, reaching only 2 draws. Croatia's last game could be the last one for Luka Modric, who has played 5 UEFA Euro Cup, reaching the quarterfinals in 2008. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thanks for watching.
For me,